there are an abundance of self-refuting statements out there. And knowing how to identify them is a really important part of logical reasoning, both in learning to assess what people think and because we don't want to employ self-refuting statements in our own reasoning either. We don't want to use those and then not be able to back up what we're saying, right?
Hey everyone, welcome to Clarity Over Chaos, the podcast brought to you by Women in Apologetics, where we cut through the noise of culture to help teen girls and young women build a confident Christian worldview. All right, you guys, good afternoon. We are so excited to be with you guys this week. And y'all, we are just going to jump right into it today because we're talking about a big topic, a critical thinking topic called logic. Logic, okay? This isn't just for left brain people or philosophers or professors, something like that. God gave all of us brains. He gave us all brains. He gave us all the ability, more or less, maybe some people more or less, to think critically, to use reason, and to be logical. Okay. God wants us to use the brains that he gave us. And if you know us, we love apologetics, and most people who love apologetics love C.S. Lewis. And he's got a quote for everything, including this one. I love this one. He says, God has room for people with very little sense, but he wants us to use all the sense that we have. So good. So even if you've just got a couple neurons worth of sense in your brain, God will take you, he'll use you, but he does want you to use all the sense that you have. And so that's what we're talking about today. Logic, critical thinking, good reasoning. And these things should be intuitive to most people because God made us in his image and he is rational. He is logical. In fact, William Lane Craig, he's a phenomenal Christian apologist. He says that logic is really like thinking God's thoughts after him. So when we use logic, reason, things like that, we're kind of thinking God's thoughts because that's how God created us. He made us to look at the world around us and infer things and make assumptions based on the evidence that we see. And it's a consistent thing. Like we don't expect tomorrow to wake up and for contradictions to be something that doesn't bother us or make us go, right? Like logic is consistent. It's built into our minds. It's built into the world around us. And as Christian apologists, as women who want to defend their faith thoughtfully, we need to have a really good understanding of at least the basics of logic, good, basic, critical thinking and reasoning, because these principles will help you defend your faith thoughtfully. You'll be able to detect when someone is using good reasoning or bad reasoning. And hopefully it'll keep you from using bad reasoning yourself. When I was in seminary, we had to take a graduate level course on logic for our apologetics degree. And it was really hard. Like the logic course was really challenging and really tough, but it makes you kind of realize, oh, I've kind of been using bad reasoning or appealing more to emotion than logic. It's interesting what logic and learning the core principles of that will bring up in your mind. So I think all Christians should learn to use logic. It helps you defend your faith more thoughtfully. And we want to make and offer strong, sound, valid arguments, well-constructed arguments for our faith. So I already said the word argument. Let's talk about that really quick. So Cassie, when you hear the word argument, like what immediately pops into your mind? What do you picture?
People yelling at each other.
Exactly. Like a social media comment section where you see the first comment and then it says like 300 more beneath it. And you're like, I know exactly what I'm about to see when I click on this. Exactly.
Name calling, anger.
Correct. Holiday dinner parties, things like that with your relatives. Yeah. Arguments. So those indeed are arguments usually, but in the terms of logic, when we're talking about logic, arguments have a very simple form. And this has nothing to do with emotion. It has nothing to do with yelling at people. An argument is simply a set of statements that have two components. You have a set of premises and a conclusion. So what am I talking about? Let's take this very, very simple argument. Here we go. All golden retrievers are dogs. Daisy is a golden retriever. Therefore, Daisy is a dog. That's an example of an argument. So the premises, all golden retrievers are dogs. Daisy is a golden retriever. Those are the premises that lead to a conclusion. And in this case, it's that Daisy is a dog. That is an argument in its most basic sense. So it's a set of statements where a set of premises lead to a conclusion. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean that people are screaming at each other. We hope not. That is simply what an argument is in its most basic definition. And so if the premises are true, all golden retrievers are dogs, Daisy is a golden retriever, and it leads to the conclusion that Daisy is a dog, then that means that argument is valid. It is a valid argument. That means if the premises are true and they lead, well, actually, not even if they're true, if the premises necessarily lead to the conclusion, then it's a valid argument. A sound argument, so you have a valid argument and a sound argument. We want both here. A sound argument is when those premises are also true. So let's say if I said all golden retrievers are dogs, Daisy's a dog, therefore Daisy's a dog. Daisy golden retriever, therefore Daisy is a dog. If actually Daisy was a fish, then that means that argument would not be sound because there was an untrue premise in there. And so we want arguments in favor of our faith or when we're giving arguments for our faith, we want them to be valid, lead to a true conclusion, and sound. We want everything we say to be true. We don't want to have falsehoods, lies in our arguments, things like that. I am like flying through this. Trust me. You could spend months and years studying logic, and there's no way we could cover every facet of it or every definition. I'm just trying to give you kind of the main points, especially when it comes to faith-based conversation. So we want our arguments to be both valid and sound when it comes to defending our faith. And so an argument that is very common and popular in Christian apologetics, when we are giving evidence for God, evidence for the existence of God, there's a really powerful argument called the Kalam cosmological argument, which sounds very complicated, and it is, but most people can understand it. Because in its most simple form, here's how this argument goes, and I will argue that it is valid and sound. So everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2 is the universe began to exist. Therefore, in conclusion, the universe has a cause. So the premises, everything that begins to exist has a cause, and the universe began to exist. Most people will agree with those things, that is the case. And so the conclusion being, therefore, the universe has a cause. The universe isn't just this eternal, always there kind of thing. And our scientists like Albert Einstein and Hubble's research have helped bolster, that idea that the universe had a beginning. Whether you talk about the Big Bang or not, we agree that the universe came into existence at some point. And so we know that anything that comes to existence comes from something else, right? We as people come from other things. My phone was constructed by someone in some factory and those pieces came from somewhere else, right? Anything physical comes into existence from something else. So therefore, we can conclude that the universe also came into existence from something else. It has a cause. And as Christians, we believe this cause is God. He is the first cause of the universe. So I would argue that argument is both valid and sound. The premises lead to the conclusion, and I believe those premises are true. Okay, so now we're going to jump into, again, I could spend forever on different laws of logic, but there's one really important one that we need to establish before we talk about some other things. So this is called the law of non-contradiction. So Cassie, if you had to explain what a contradiction is, what would you say?
It would be like if I said that Jade's hair is purple, but also brown.
Yes, like 100% purple and 100% brown.
I can look at Jade and see, well, it's clearly not all purple and she doesn't have purple hair.
Yes, purple lighting, but not purple hair.
Right.
Exactly. So according to the law of non-contradiction, two statements cannot be both true if there's a contradiction between them. So something cannot be true and not true at the same time. So my hair can't be 100% brown and 100% purple at the same time in the same way. It could be brown or purple. It could be neither brown nor purple. It could be partially brown and partially purple, but not 100% both of those things at the same time in the same way. So where we see this come up in faith-based conversations is the idea of religious pluralism, which means that people will say, basically all religions are the same. Basically, each religion kind of has its own flavor or its own attitude or whatever, but they're basically all the same. They all lead to God. They all have the same ideas. It's all like part of a whole kind of thing. But this falls apart really quickly if you understand that there are contradictions between different belief systems, that each belief system has a view of who God is, who we are, what salvation is, and those often contradict each other when you compare the religions. So here's what I mean. Christianity says that Jesus is the divine Son of God and salvation is only attainable through him. No other religion says that. In fact, let's take Islam. So Muslims would not believe that Jesus was a divine son of God. They believe he was a prophet, and that salvation really has nothing to do with him. It's more about, do your good deeds outweigh your bad deeds, and only God can judge that. In fact, it is a sin to worship Jesus and to believe that he was more than just a prophet. So either Jesus is the son of God or he's not. According to Christianity, God is triune. He's a Trinity. He always has existed as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and he always will. Other religions do not hold to that. Judaism does not hold to that. Jehovah's Witnesses do not hold to that. Mormons do not hold to that. In Mormonism, there's multiple gods. And so either God is one or he's not. God is triune or he's not. Jesus is the son of God or he's not. We're either, we will either be saved through Jesus or not, right? It could all be wrong, like logically. All of these things could be not true, but they can't all be true if there's contradictions between these things. So let's take the Hindu belief system for an example. They believe that when someone dies, their soul enters a state of reincarnation over and over again based on your karma. How you acted in a past life determines how you will come back when you are reborn into a new life. And that kind of goes on for eternity, from my understanding. And so in Christianity, we believe when we die, we stand before God for judgment. And those who have put their faith in Jesus will be allowed the gift of heaven, and those who do not will be condemned. And so those two things can't both be happening at the same time. They could both be wrong, but either we stand before God or we don't. We enter a cycle of reincarnation and rebirth and death and over, or we don't. Okay, so all of that to say, the law of non-contradiction comes up a lot when we are talking about belief systems. There's really no way to say that they're all true, because then there's contradictions between them. They make mutually exclusive claims. Okay, Cassie, now will you explain for us, now that we're talking about arguments, we're talking about how logic, law of logic is non-contradiction. How does that come about when we're talking about people who use assertions instead of just arguments?
Right off the bat, we can strongly say that assertions are not arguments, okay? You'll find that people will try to get away with a statement or an assertion instead of an argument, and what they'll do is they'll just throw a statement out there with no supporting evidence whatsoever, and then they'll try to just stand on that. But you have to remember what an argument is, right? So if someone says Christians are bigots, or Christians are anti-science, or the God of the Old Testament is a bully, things like this, then we can look at that and say, okay, does that have everything required to be an argument? An argument has to have the premise that supports a conclusion, right? And that doesn't have both of those. So all it's saying is it's throwing out a conclusion that they've come up with. We don't know what the premise is for that. What's the evidence? Where's that coming from? So don't let that fly. Make sure that you challenge something like that, because you want to know, okay, what are they thinking? Where are they getting this from, to understand their logic behind what they're saying? So when you read Tactics by Greg Koukl, he suggests asking a lot of questions. So questions like, what do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? Those are great questions to ask when somebody throws out an assertion. I had a personal example of this recently, where a woman just in a conversation said to me, well, Christians persecute women who get abortions. And so I kind of paused and went, oh, well, what do you mean by that? Well, I just don't think it's our place to judge them, and Christians judge them. And I said, oh, well, have you witnessed this? Well, no. And so as we dug in, it became clear, even to her, that she was just repeating something she'd heard without actually having any evidence for it. And so we were able to dig into that issue. And so really look at when somebody throws something out like that. It may not be as blatant, but sometimes it is. Christians are bigots. Well, what do you mean by that? What's the evidence for that? Challenge that. Don't let it go. Some other examples, and some other examples of this might be like a self-refuting statement is another kind of statement or assertion that doesn't satisfy its own claim, right? So it can't meet its own requirements. My mother never had any children. Well, how can she be my mother then? So so it's one of those things where it's going to refute itself. It's not an argument because it doesn't have the two components. It doesn't have the premise and the conclusion that follows from the premise. So self-refuting statements are just that. They're just a statement. They're just an assertion. They're merely a conclusion that's thrown out there with nothing to support it. And you'll find that most people don't even realize that their statements don't hold up to their own requirements. So a lot of times today in our culture, there are a lot of self-refuting statements that have become widely held beliefs. So to identify these, all you have to do is consider if the statement satisfies its own criteria. So an example of this might be if you hear someone say, you shouldn't judge others. Well, by telling someone what they should or should not do, whether they should or should not judge, you are pronouncing judgment on their behavior. You're doing what you just said someone shouldn't do. Another example would be there's no such thing as objective truth, or there are no absolutes. Well, that statement sounds pretty absolute to me. It sounds like you're throwing out something you think is objectively true. You're demonstrating that you don't really believe there are absolute truths. Honestly, it refutes itself. That you do believe there are absolute truths, because that is one. And maybe a last example would be that science is the only reliable source of truth. That's very popular right now, right?
Huge.
Follow the science. And so when we look at this, science can't verify that claim. That's hugely problematic. You can't test that claim in a lab. You can't use the scientific method to figure it out. This is a philosophical statement about science. It's not a scientific statement. So the phrase science is the only reliable source of truth can't meet its own demands. It's self-refuting. So unfortunately, there are an abundance of self-refuting statements out there, and knowing how to identify them is a really important part of logical reasoning, both in learning to assess what people think and because we don't want to employ self-refuting statements in our own reasoning either. We don't want to use those and then not be able to back up what we're saying, right? So Jade, what are some other logical fallacies that we might run into?
Exactly. Yeah, like you said, unfortunately, there's no shortage of bad logic out there, or bad reasoning, or errors of logic. And so self-refuting statements are an example of kind of a logical fallacy. It just doesn't employ good logic, statements that can't even hold up to their own criteria. And so for the purpose of today's discussion, let's talk a little bit about informal fallacies. So that sounds very lofty and confusing. Trust me, you're about to say, oh yeah, I hear this all the time, or I hear these types of things everywhere. You will, and if you begin to recognize when someone's using an informal logical fallacy, you don't necessarily have to tell them that that's what they're doing, but you can be aware of that and point out, hey, the way that you're arguing right now, or the kind of claims that you are stating actually doesn't hold up, or doesn't use good reasoning, good logic. And unfortunately, when people use informal logical fallacies, they sound really persuasive, and they sound really like gotcha moments, or, ooh, how are you going to overcome that? And no one likes to be in that position of feeling like, oh, they just got me, or they really are winning this argument right now. When you're able to recognize that someone's using a bad argument or using bad logic, you're able to kind of calmly and gently course correct and say, well, actually, these things that you're saying have nothing to do with actually what I'm talking about. If you've been impacted by Clarity Over Chaos, or any of the resources that Women in Apologetics provides, would you consider partnering with us through a monthly gift? Your support helps us continue this vital work and reach even more individuals with the tools they need to stand firm in their faith. Personally, I am so proud to be a part of WIA, because each woman on our team faithfully uses her gifts and abilities as we produce resources to equip our sisters in Christ to defend their faith. You can help support this mission of ours by getting started with a monthly gift at womeninapologetics.com/donate. Let's get into some specific examples where you could see this come up. So the first one is called a red herring fallacy. If you're in school right now, you might have heard this as like a literary device. The red herring means like an author or a director of a movie put something in there to distract you, to kind of, if you think the murderer in this whodunit movie is this guy, but it's actually this other guy. The director wants to confuse you a little bit. The author wants to confuse you, mislead you, so you don't figure it out too soon. So they're going to put red herrings in there. I think a herring's a type of fish. I don't know where this comes from and why it's actually called that, but it's called a red herring. Something you meant to distract you from the main point, essentially. Okay, so where would this come up in a faith-based conversation? So let's say that I am sharing the gospel with a friend, and I'm explaining that Jesus died on the cross for them, for their sins, and through Jesus' sacrifice, they can be saved. I'm just plainly explaining the gospel. So let's say someone overhears me and comes over to me and is aggravated that I'm doing this, they're upset that I'm sharing the gospel with someone. And let's say they approach me and they're like, oh, well, religion is like the reason so many wars have started and the world would be so much better off without any organized religion, right? That's kind of an emotional argument. And that feels in the moment really like, oh, how am I going to refute that? Because that was just this huge thing they said. Where do I even start to refute that? And there totally are thoughtful ways to counter that. I would not agree with either of those things. But that those have no bearing. They really have nothing to do with my original point with sharing the gospel with someone. The claims that religions cause wars or that the world would be better off without organized religion is not relevant to whether Jesus is the Son of God and that we must be saved through him. So a lot of times if people are uncomfortable or they don't really have a super powerful argument against what you're saying, they will use something like this to distract you. They'll try to bring up something else to shift the focus off of what you're saying, to make you look dumb or weak or like, kind of that gotcha moment. But it's a red herring. And you can just explain exactly what it is. Like, hey, well, we can get to that in a second or another time. But what I'm talking about right now is that Jesus is the Son of God and we must be saved through him. So when someone brings up something to distract you, to lead you away, to avoid the question, it's called a red herring fallacy. The next two informal fallacies I want to talk about, they're also very common, and they involve attacking or criticizing the person who makes the argument rather than the argument itself. You will see this everywhere, and unfortunately, I'm guilty of it. We probably all have done this at one point or another because we didn't know what else to say. We were just aggravated, and it's kind of a low blow type of moment. So the first one of these is called the genetic fallacy, like your genes, genetic fallacy. So that is when someone rejects an argument based on the source of the argument rather than the content of the argument itself. So where might you see this today? This is very common. When someone rejects Christianity or rejects the church based on their perception that Christians are hypocritical or that the church is full of hypocrites. That's very common. People often don't want to have anything to do with Christianity because they perceive Christians as hypocritical. But whether a person who claims to be a Christian, whether they live in accordance with what the Bible teaches, really has nothing to do with whether the Bible is true, God is real, or if Jesus really rose from the dead. Like if someone wants to know if Christianity is true, they should look at the evidence for the faith, like look at the evidence for God, for Jesus, for the reliability of the Bible, not just looking at the behavior of Christians, because that really has nothing to do with whether God is real, whether Jesus is real. I'm not giving Christians a pass to be hypocrites. Please don't mishear me. We should not be being hypocrites. In fact, Jesus had a lot to say about how we should not be hypocrites. But whether a follower of a belief, whether they are good Christians or not, whether they're good Muslims or not, whether they're good Mormons or not, has really nothing to do with whether that faith is true or not. You need to look at the evidence for that faith, not just how their followers act, to avoid committing a genetic fallacy. It's kind of like, let's say like you had a doctor who, ran all this blood work for you and was like, hey, you've got some serious issues going on based on this blood work. But you were like, hey, I'm not going to believe you because I saw you smoking in the parking lot, right? Like, it's not good that your doctor smokes. You shouldn't smoke. It's not good for you. But their behavior, their character in this situation has nothing to do with your blood work results. That's an objective thing, right? That's kind of a genetic fallacy as well. Okay, so the next type of fallacy that attacks the person instead of the argument is probably the most common one that you'll hear, and it has a Latin meaning or a Latin phrase. It's called the ad hominem fallacy, ad hominem fallacy, which is Latin for to the man or against the man or woman. And so this is a type of genetic fallacy that you'll hear over and over again, where someone attacks your character, attacks the person making the argument rather than the argument that is being made. And so a lot of times when you hear an ad hominem attack, it means that other person has nothing left. They don't have a better way to refute your argument, or they can't think in the moment of what to say. So they just attack you to try to embarrass you, discredit you or God or whoever, instead of actually interacting with and addressing the argument itself. And so as Christians, we are never to do this. Like if someone is not a Christian, if they're an atheist, a skeptic or whatever, and they're criticizing our faith, we have no right to be like, well, you're an idiot, you're stupid. I bet you cheated in school or whatever, like whatever it might look like to try to tear down that person. That is not godly. That is not scriptural. In fact, Paul tells us, we are to destroy arguments. We are to destroy bad thoughts. We are not to destroy people. We are, as Christians, we are never, our intention should never be to hurt someone, to tear them down. We want to present truth. We want to show them what is true and what's good and what's right. But we don't do that. We don't do that by hurting them or tearing them down. And, it's such a shame when you'll see people in evangelism encounters or even apologetics discussions, and they're making really good points, but if they're just being a jerk and they're being condescending and they're being rude, how is that going to win that person to Jesus? Like, yeah, you might be right, or you might like put them in a corner with your good arguments and they have nowhere to go. But like, if you just treated them poorly, are they going to want to go to church with you? Are they going to ever want to talk to you again with follow-up questions? Probably not. So we need to avoid the ad hominem attack, or any kind of ad hominem attack, when you're attacking a person, not the argument that they made. So again, if someone's like going in on you that you're a bigot or that you're intolerant or hateful or prejudiced or homophobic, whatever, as a Christian, like, that's an ad hominem attack. That's not addressing an argument that you've made. So just be aware of that. Okay, one last one I want to leave you guys with, because I know there are so many fallacies we could talk about, but this one comes up a lot too. This is the straw man fallacy, and it kind of uses a different type of technique rather than attacking the person, attacking the source, avoiding the question. It is when someone misrepresents your argument by twisting it into a simplified version of what you were saying, or a distorted version of the argument you were making, so that it's easier for them to critique. It's easier for them to tear down if they take your argument, make it sound a little dumber, a little more simple, put words in your mouth, and then they tear that apart and they're like, boom, gotcha. Like, well, no, I didn't actually say that. That's not the argument I was putting forth. And so let's say, again, you're sharing the gospel with someone, you're explaining that Jesus is the Son of God, the only way to God, and that we must be saved through him. And let's say a person hears that and they say, oh, so you believe in a God who sends all kind of good people to hell just because they don't believe in your version of him. Like, whoa, okay, you said a lot in that sentence, and it sounded really punchy, and it sounded like you really got me there. And when it's phrased that way, you can feel like, oh, how am I going to respond to that? That's because a straw man fallacy has occurred. They're distorting what you have said, and they're presenting it back to you in their terms, not in your terms. And so when this happens, just say, wait, that's not what I said. This is what I said. Take your time. Don't let people get away with misrepresenting you, misrepresenting who you said Jesus is. Just say, no, I didn't say that. This is what I said. And then try to continue that conversation. And so, yes, the ad hominem fallacies, the straw man fallacies, genetic, red herring, you will see these come up everywhere. I mean, comment sections, interactions between people. And there's really no such thing as like Christian logic. Logic is logic. Like we use this in all types of arguments, whether you're arguing about like where you want to go to eat tonight, or talking about politics, like whatever, you will find these fallacies used in all types of subjects and conversations. And we're not encouraging you to weaponize these things. Like critical thinking is good. But if you're going to use these to make people feel stupid or look stupid, that is not the heart behind what God wants us to do. We want to be smart. We want to be rational, good thinkers, but not trying to make people feel dumb or make them feel like we're being condescending towards them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that's actually, I just wanted to add a reminder, just to close us out, that we can absolutely be confident in our faith, that it's logical, that it's based on sound reasoning, because God is the Logos, right? He is the source of logic. He created a world of order. And while we know that we may not know all the answers, we know the one who does. So we can be confident in that. These arguments are to help us to understand and communicate the Bible and the fact that it explains the reality of the human condition, and it's true. Our worldview makes sense because it reflects reality on truth. Logic gives us that confidence to know for ourselves that what we believe is true, even when we're struggling or suffering or facing someone else who is. And so because of this, we can speak with authority. But like you said, Jade, we really also need to remember to be gracious when we do that. Don't be condescending. It doesn't make you superior that you have this logic. It means that you have hope. And you should be sharing that hope. And the best way to do that is to be gracious. And 1 Peter 3:15 says, But in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. So our confidence in the truth should lead us to be humble and courageous in our posture. And we're humble because we know what the truth means in regards to who we are, right? We are also sinners in need of a savior. We're sharing the gospel not because we don't need it, but because we have that hope and we know that we did need it and we want someone else to have it. And then we're also courageous because we know the truth of who Jesus is and what he's done for us. So remember that many of the fallacies are tactics to allow for emotions to take over from logic. Keep your emotions in check. We still need to remain gentle and respectful no matter what of others as we share our these truths rather. In tactics, Greg Kokel says, if anyone gets mad, I lose. People are not inclined to change their minds when they're angry. And the same goes with being hurt if you hurt someone. So use your logic, call out those fallacies, have confidence and courage to do so, but just remember that you also need to be winsome. You need to be gentle and respectful and keep your emotions in check, if that makes sense.
Very good stuff. Okay, y'all. Well, we want to leave you with some resources if you want to study the topic of logic even further. And so these would be Tactics by Greg Kokel, which we already mentioned. That is a phenomenal book. It covers so much of what we talked about and more. It's truly one of the books I recommend to anyone who is studying apologetics for the first time or wants to be better equipped on how to share their faith, how to navigate conversations. That's what the book is about, having conversations about your faith with people. It is so good. Truly one of my most recommended and given away books to people who want to know more about this topic. Also, I want to point you to our website, womeninapologetics.com. We have 3 different short courses. One is called What is Truth? One is called What is a Worldview? And the third one is called What is Logic, which I got to write for our We Are Short course. I loved writing it. I love this topic. And so it has video instruction. It has study guides, group discussion questions, note-taking sheets, little quizzes that you can take. You can study or complete this course on your own or with a small group, with your church, whichever. I hope it is very helpful. I loved writing it, and my co-writers for the other 2 sessions or 2 topics did a phenomenal job as well. So that's available on our WIA website, What is Logic? So Cassie, tell us about the other 2 resources that you would recommend.
Yeah, and just a shout out, that course is awesome. I took it, so I really enjoyed it. Yes. Another resource is Filter It Through a Brain Cell by Kathy Gibbons. That's a podcast that we really recommend. She goes through so many of the logical fallacies. I mean, there are so many episodes, and they're really good because she walks you through what is it, what does it look like, here's an example, and here's how to notice it. And then she even challenges you to look at news headlines and things like that. See when you can see these fallacies. And like she says, and you said, Jade, once you start seeing them, you see them everywhere. You just can't help it. So that's Filter It Through a Brain Cell podcast by Kathy Gibbons. And then if you want to dig a little bit deeper, even if this is a topic that really fascinates you and you enjoy the idea of logic, there's a book called Logic in the Way of Jesus by Travis Dickinson. It's really good as well. It goes through how to use critical thinking as a Christian, all the examples in the Bible, even that Jesus uses logic. It's really fascinating book and really digs into that. So I highly recommend that as well. That's Logic and the Way of Jesus by Travis Dickinson.
Such good stuff. We're so blessed that we live in a time where we have written and audio and book and website versions of all these types of resources. I mean, we truly are blessed to be able to learn about these things, even outside of a university or seminary setting. It's really, really cool. All right, you guys, we are so glad you tuned in with us today. We hope this was helpful. And I just have a feeling if you're listening to this podcast, you already are a reasonable, rational, logical person. And so we hope this kind of gives you a springboard into studying these things further, kind of give you some things to look out for as you're having discussions about your faith, about why you believe what you believe, both with people you know, or maybe you're watching these kind of discussions take place online or in front of you, and you can kind of start filtering these things through these fundamental ideas of logic. And we hope this was helpful, and we appreciate you guys tuning in every week. We love you guys. We're praying for you, and we will see you next time on Clarity Over Chaos. Bye, everybody.
Bye.